first up is Pieces of a Woman, which stars Vanessa Kirby, Shia LaBeouf, and Ellen Burstyn. And I watched this about 2 months ago, and there's a lot of films, I think, coming out this award season which are very female-centric, which I appreciate. But this one was challenging for me for a couple different reasons. So the story is basically Shia LaBeouf and Vanessa Kirby are a couple who are literally about to have a baby, and this isn't really a spoiler, this is the setup of the entire film. They are choosing to do a home birth, and the home birth goes awry, and so the rest of the film is dealing with all of that. And the first, I want to say almost 20 minutes of the film is dealing with that home birth. And I don't know if anyone else had to watch this film in school, but there was a science movie called The Miracle of Life, which gave you a front row seat to what birth looked like, and this came pretty damn close to trying to recreate that. It's very in the moment. It's a very character study moment during that first birth scene, and while it's hard to watch, I think it was probably, I mean, I have not had kids, so I don't know what that experience is like, but it felt like it was accurate to probably what mothers might be experiencing in those moments, and the sort of challenges, the push, the whatever, process, the process of giving birth, I guess. I have a couple problems with this movie. One is just Shia LaBeouf in general. I think he's a very troubled person, and I also watched this movie before all the stuff with him and FKA Twigs came to light, and I found him problematic before this, and so now sort of reflecting back upon it, it's hard not to take that into account. It wasn't part of my experience watching it, but I already, don't love him, but he's not playing a likable character really, so it's kind of like, oh, well, this feeds into it, but it's very hard to watch his scenes in it, especially now under the framework of knowing what went down with him and FKA Twigs. So that's one problem. And then this should be Vanessa Kirby's piece, but I feel like it tries to, it's called Pieces of a Woman, and yet it focuses so much on him, and I do wish more time had been spent on her, and they do spend a lot of time on it, but more time had been spent on her part of it. There are other women in her life who I feel like it gets distracted by. I think the one thing in my notes looking back that I was like, oh, you know what this movie does really, really well? It does small talk really well. I feel like we don't see small talk accurately in scenes a lot, especially when you're in a group of people and people are talking to each other and multiple conversations are happening. For some reason that stood out to me, but the fact that and I suppose the first opening, however many long birth scene stood out, and that was kind of it, says to me that this is not necessarily the most successful film. There are a couple other things in the movie that just felt really far-fetched, especially considering how grounded the rest of it was. It should come as no surprise, Ellen Burstyn, not a huge fan of Shia LaBeouf's character. He knocked up her precious daughter. I get it. I can't blame her character for not liking him, but there are just things that felt really extreme, that felt out of place in a film that is trying to be so grounded in reality. And so I think there were enough things that were just sort of off about this film. It could have been great. I think if it hadn't been Shia LaBeouf, I think if it had reconfigured some of the focus of it, it could have been a great film. And again, Vanessa Kirby, I do think, does a really great job in this, but it's more Pieces of a Movie than Pieces of a Woman. So I'm only going to give it 3.5 out of 5. And next up is a film called Fatale, which stars Hilary Swank, Michael Ealy, Mike Coulter, and Danny Pino. And wow. So I don't know exactly what I was expecting from this. The story revolves around Michael Ealy's character. He's a successful sports agent, and his life starts to fall apart when a random woman he met, played by Hilary Swank, in, I think, Vegas, comes into his life. And I don't really feel like this is a spoiler, but she is a police officer, and she ends up investigating a crime that he is tangentially involved in or victim of, or we're not sure. And it's supposed to be this crime thriller, but this was billed as a sexy crime thriller, and I felt like there was zero chemistry between almost anybody in the film in terms of in terms of romantic or sexual chemistry. I just was like, this is, I think Hilary Swank is a beautiful, attractive woman, but she is not someone who I would ever peg as sexy. And honestly, there were multiple times in this movie I was like, what is her character's motivation? What is the point of this movie? What are we trying to do here? I think they were trying to set up a lot of stuff about race and racial dynamics, having her being a white female cop, having him being a black, successful man in a competitive industry, but it all just feels so ridiculous. I think the motivations don't make sense. The chemistry doesn't make sense. The crime, I love a good, even if it's not great, but I love a crime thriller, and the crime doesn't make any sense in this. And so it's just like, why am I following all these people who I just could not give a damn about? Why am I wasting my time on this? Even if people were interested in it as a thinly veiled reason to watch some sexy get it on scenes, they're not that sexy. Also, I'm sorry, this is just a pet peeve of mine, but they are, in a very fancy suite in Vegas, and they wake up the next morning and there's like one sheet on the bed. And I'm like, have you ever been to a hotel? Just a hotel in general, not even a fancy suite in Vegas, but there's not just going to be, and, no sign of any other sheets. I'm like, that's not how hotels generally work. That's not how bedding generally works. So that level of detail, like that level of attention and detail is applicable to the entire film. It's that one sheet thin. So really going to suggest you skip this one. Watch A Fatal Attraction. Watch any other film in this genre. But hard pass for me. I'm only going to give it 1 out of 5.